Hello and welcome to the Agile Innovation Leaders Podcast. I'm Ola Ojako. On this podcast, I speak with world-class leaders and doers about themselves and a variety of topics spanning Agile, lean innovation, business, leadership, and much more, with actionable takeaways for you, the listener. Hello, everyone. I'm really honored and pleased to introduce David Bland as my guest for this episode. He is a best-selling author of the book Testing Business Ideas, and he's also the founder of Precoil, an organization that's focused on helping companies to find product market fit using lean startup design thinking and business model innovation. He's not a newcomer to the world of Agile as well. So David, it's an honor to have you on the Agile Innovation Leaders podcast. Thank you so much for making the time.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me on. I'm excited to be here.
Right. So where I usually start with all my guests, because personally I am interested in the story behind, the person. Are there any happenings or experiences that have shaped you into who you are today?
Yeah, I think, through childhood, dealing with a lot of kind of uncertainty, and then, ended up going to school for design. And I thought I was going to go a different career path. And then at the last moment, I was like, I kind of want to like really dig into design. And um, I think people were sort of shocked by that with the people around me. And so I really kind of dove into that. And then I came out of school thinking, oh, I'm going to join a startup and retire in my mid 20s, like, because this is a dot-com craze. Everyone was making, all this money. And obviously that didn't happen, but I learned a lot at the startups, and I got introduced to Agile really early on in my career at startups because we had to go really fast, and we were in like a heavily regulated industry, so we couldn't break stuff, and we had to have kind of process and everything. And I did that for a while, and then I realized, wow, like there's some people that could learn from my mistakes, and so we kind of switched coasts. We were near Washington D.C. for a while, and then we moved to the San Francisco Bay Area. And I started working with companies there, and I was like, well, let me see if I can just really dig in and help people learn how to apply stuff and coach them through it. And that was around 2010 or 11 or so, and I've been doing it ever since. And I think why I love it so much is that it kind of helps people deal with uncertainty, gives them a process to deal with uncertainty. At the same time, I have a hard time with uncertainty. So maybe it's kind of a little bit therapeutic for me to help others deal with, uncertainty as well. So yeah, I just love what I do.
And so you mentioned you don't like uncertainty, but helping other people deal with uncertainty helps you. That's interesting. Do you want to
Yeah,
expand on that?
I very much like my routines and everything. And I feel like I come at it from a process point of view. So when I'm dealing with uncertainty, it's like, oh, what kind of process can I apply to that so I feel a little better about things, even though it's a lot of stuff's outside my control. At least I could have kind of a process. And so I feel as if, when I'm dealing with people who feel all this anxiety, they're working on a new idea and they're not sure if it's going to be any good or not, giving them kind of a process to work through it together. I don't really tell them if their idea is going to be good or not, because who am I to judge their ideas most of the time? It's more about, well, here's a process you can apply to all that stuff you're working through, and maybe you can come up to some sort of, investment decision on whether or not you should go forward with that idea. So I feel as if, and then my demeanor and everything, comes off as someone that like, oh, I can talk to this guy, and he's actually going to respect me. And so I feel like my style plus the uncertainty bit kind of fits together really well. So I kind of have a style where I come into orgs and say, you have a lot of uncertainty. Here's a process. It's going to be fine. We're going to work through it together. And yeah, it tends to work out pretty well.
Yeah, and what comes across to me is that you give them, tools or a process to help them hopefully come to an evidence-based conclusion without you having to share your opinion, or hopefully they don't have to have personal opinions imposing on whatever conclusion that is. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just a process.
Yeah. And so what put you on the path to writing the book Testing Business Ideas? I was one of your students. You went at the masterclass you and Alex Osterwalder ran during the COVID lockdown. And you mentioned during that session, I don't know if you remember, that you probably went for a retreat somewhere, or you went on a hike as part of the writing process, and that Alex gave you a hard time or something. So can you share your version of the story?
Oh yeah, I mean, it was a joy writing with him. One of the difficult times for me writing that book. So first, Alex approached me writing it.
Mm.
Initially, it was just going to be me, and then I mean, he needed to be involved, and so he played a big role strategically in helping me kind of think about the book writing process because I've never written a book like this, and then also had it published, and also did the whole four color,
Yeah.
landscape style, very visual book. It's not that you just write an outline and then you start putting in words. It's a very different process. So, yeah, he pushed me a little bit during that process. I would say he would challenge some of my ideas and say like, "Are you explaining this in a way that where people can understand?" And so I feel as if it was a very productive, process writing the book with him. It took about a year, I would say. Um, I think the way it came about was it was pretty much born out of my coaching because I was helping companies with a lot of uncertainty, early stage ideas, and they would say, "Well, we know how to do interviews, and we're going to do surveys, and we're going to build the whole thing." And it's like, well, there's other things you could do that are beyond interviews and surveys. And so he and I were continuously talking about this, and it's like, well, if people are only comfortable doing interviews and surveys, they're not going to address all their risk. They're going to address a part of the risk, but not, they're not. There's so much more they can do. And so we started thinking about, well, is there a book that we could put that together and give people like a resource guide? So it's more like a textbook or almost something you would read in a university. My editor I spoke to him a couple weeks ago. He's like, this is required reading at Stanford now and some other places in university programs. And so it's very much like a textbook. But the reason we wrote it was, to help people find a path forward, to find a way to go and de-risk what they're working on. And so I felt it was very ambitious to put that all into a book. And of course, it has some flaws, but I think for the most part, it does the job, and that's why it's been really successful.
In my experience, very well laid out. It takes a lot of work to distill these ideas into something that seems simple and easy to follow. So I do concur. It's been very helpful to me as well, and the ideas. In your book, in the flap, it says, okay, your number one job as an innovator, entrepreneur, or a corporation is to test your business ideas to reduce the risk of failure. And I think you've alluded it, you've kind of touched on that in explaining how your career, has gotten you where you are today. But what, in your experience, do you find leaders and organizations missing the most when it comes to testing ideas?
It's hard to unwind it all because it goes back to how do you become a leader, right?
Hmm.
And so, at least in Western, in the United States anyway, where I do some of my work, I feel as if it's very egocentric. It's very about what I can do and what I know. So there's like a progression of becoming a leader where you grow up in an organization because you have the answers, or at least you're able to convince people you know the answers, and then you're promoted and keep getting promoted. And so when I'm coming in and saying, well, we might not know the answers, or we might need to test our way through and find the answers, it almost goes against that whole kind of almost like worldview you've built up or someone has built up over the years, where it's about me, right? It
Hmm.
has to be more than just about you as a person, right? It's like, how do you enable leaders around you, and how do you create more leaders around you, and all that. And so I think where there's contradiction is this idea of, okay, I'm promoted to where I am because I have the answers, but now I want to enable people to test their way through things and find answers. And you almost need a feedback loop there of somebody that's willing to say, look, do you understand how you've unraveled some of this, or how you've undermined things by saying, well, I know this is a good idea, so build it anyway. Or
Hmm.
that's not the test I would have ran. I would have done this other thing. Like you give people almost like the benefit of your opinion, but they take it as marching orders, whether you realize it or not. And
Sure.
then it becomes this core of, well, why am I running tests at all? Because my leader is essentially going to tell me what to build. And so I think there's just some unpacking a bit of, well, I searched for the right answer in school and I was rewarded for that. And I went into business and I was rewarded for the right answer. And now we're telling you, well, there might not be a right answer. There are multiple right answers in different
Hmm.
paths and their choices. And I think sometimes leaders have a hard time with that because it almost contradicts everything they've done in the past to be successful.
So what I'm hearing you say, David, is that in terms of, even before we get to testing the ideas, it's that there needs to be a mindset shift a paradigm shift of, what leadership is all about. It's no longer going to be about, the person who knows who knows the way, knows all the answers and tells people what to do, but moving from that to saying, hey, I recognize I have limits and I may not have all the answers, and I empower you all, for us to work together to test our way to find what the right path or direction would be.
Yeah, it's more about your leadership style and accountability, right?
Mm,
So I think you severely limit what an organization could do if everyone's relying on you for the answers. There's it's going to be really tough to scale that, because if all answers have to come through you, then how do you scale? But also, it goes from transactional to transformational in a way. So transactional is, it's very much like, I want you to do something by this date on time, on budget, and on scope, and then basically hold you accountable to doing that. And then there's a very transactional level of leadership there. It's like, I asked you to do this thing, or told you to do this thing, you did this thing, so therefore I trust you. Where I'm trying to get a bit deeper is, what can you say? Well, how do I empower a team to go find out what needs to be built, or if there's a real
mm,
problem there, and then have them give me an account of, oh, we're making progress towards that, or you know what, we shouldn't go forward with this because this isn't worth pursuing. Nobody has this problem, etc. And respecting their wishes, or at least having a conversation about that. And so, I think it does require a little bit of leadership. Looking at your style, looking at the words you use, looking at how you lead teams through uncertainty, which could be a little different than, I need this thing by this date and keep it under this cost and this scope. It's more about, well, we have an idea, we're not sure there's a market for it. Can we go test that and see if there is, and if it's viable for us, and if we can actually do it? And it's a little different leadership style. And I think if you apply a transactional leadership style to trying to lead people through uncertainty, it just backfires, because
mm,
it's very much like, run these experiments by this date, and like, it doesn't empower the teams to be able to give an account of how they're addressing the risk. So it's sort of a learning moment for leaders to say, oh, this leadership style that's worked really well for me in the past
mm.
may not actually work really well for me here. It may work against me here in trying to drive out the uncertainty of this thing that we're trying to do.
So, if I may just build on your response to the question, what in your experience has helped or could help a leader who's used to and has been in the past up until now rewarded for that transactional leadership to make the switch to a transformational leadership
I think
style?
asking them what they're worried about. I know people try to project confidence like they have the answers, but they don't. And so being able to just be open, and even if it's a one-on-one, say, hey, we have this thing where we think it might be a new business line or something that we're working on that's relatively new that we haven't done before, which is a lot of my clients. They're trying to do something that they haven't quite done before. It may not be too far away from what they're good at, but it's far enough away that they're worried. They're worried that it's not going to work. And so I try to get them to talk about, like, what's keeping you up at night? What is worrying you about this? And then usually in the back of my head, I'm saying, okay, what can I map that to? So
Mm,
I love the desirable, viable, feasible framing. I use it a lot from design thinking, user-centered design. And
mm,
so if they're worried about the customer, or there's not enough, there's not really a job to be done there, I map that back to, okay, he's worried about desirability, or she's worried about desirability. And if they're talking about, oh, we don't know if people will pay enough for this, or if we can keep costs low enough, that's like, I map it back to viability, right? And then if
yeah.
it's more about, oh, I actually don't know if we're organized well as a company to do this and really execute on it, and then I map it back to feasibility. And then from there, it's more like, well, how would we go test that, since you're worried about it, rather than just build the whole thing and launch and see what happens. And
Mm,
so I try to I'd be really careful about the words I'm using, and I'm trying to coach them into a moment where it's, okay, just let's be open and transparent, that it's not just about executing a bunch of things and then we're okay. It's more about, what are we worried about? And then how do we go address those worries sooner versus later? And so I try not to come at them with a bunch of canvases and a bunch of mapping
yeah.
tools and a bunch of stuff that would make them feel defensive, because one, they probably have not had experience with those. And two, it's like, oh, this consultant's more interested in the tools than helping me. So I try to use words that really kind of get at, what are you worried about? And then how can we go test that? And then kind of back away into the
Hmm.
process from there.
Well, it does seem like you apply quite some psychology to the whole approach because it's really about meeting people where they're at Just back to your point about viability, desirability, and feasibility, there is a school of knowledge. I mean, you are the expert here, so I'm deferring, but there's a school of knowledge that would add also like the sustainability parts to it. Or do you think it's separate from those attributes when you're looking at ideas?
Well, I work on a lot of sustainable projects at the well, even last several years, I've been working on companies trying to be more sustainable, right?
Mm,
So, like companies are manufacturing phones, they want their phones to be all recyclable materials. They want to, fully recyclable phones, let's say. So I'm working on very kind of cutting edge sustainability projects, but I still don't introducing as another circle because I'm trying to keep it very simple. And
mm,
so I know there are different flavors of it. I know some people add sustainability, some people add adaptability, some people add ethics, usability. Before I know it, it's just, you end up with seven circles and different themes. So I really try to keep it very simple.
mm,
Even Alex and I talk about adaptability because that was a theme that didn't quite make it into the book, but he talks about it in Invincible Company, which is the book he
mm.
wrote immediately after the one we wrote together. So I have ways of addressing those things, but I don't necessarily want to add a bunch of extra themes because I feel like it's already challenging people with a bunch of illity words.
Yeah,
And I notice they get confused even with the three. No matter how well I explain it, I'll see things like things that are about building it and reframed as desirability. And I'm like, no, that isn't about the customer. I mean, yes, of course we have to build what they need, but building it is more about feasible. So even
feasibility.
with the three, I see people get confused. So I just try to stick to the three as best I can. But basically, we go into sustainability projects still using those three with sustainability top of mind. So I don't really
Right.
call it out as a separate theme, but I certainly take it in consideration when we're working on those projects.
Okay. It's just keeping it simple. Okay. Thanks for that, David. And so there are some instances where there probably, people will consider are outliers to the known proven principles of, design, thinking of products, product development, customer discovery. And I can't remember, I mean, I would have attributed it to the person, but I was just reading a tweet from someone who is known in the product development world. And he was saying that if he wouldn't have guessed that, with the advent of or the popularity of generative AI, that Chat GPT, according to his books, broke all the rules of product discovery, product development, in the sense that and I wasn't aware that OpenAI was, doing lots of market research to say, hey, what do you want from, an AI assistant or a generative AI? But within months of releasing it to the public, they gained millions of users. So, what's your thought on this? Would you say it was an outlier, or is it that there were some principles working in the background that we are not aware of?
I imagine there's a lot going on we're not aware of.
Mm,
It reminds me of the older conversations about the iPhone.
mm,
There was this air of Steve Jobs had this single brilliant idea about the iPhone and then willed it into being, and then everyone it was wildly successful, right? But I look at that even like the first iPhone as in a way it was kind of a minimum viable product. I mean, the hardware was pretty solid, but the software, the OS was not. I mean, it didn't have really basic stuff that we would expect that we had on other things like Blackberries at the time.
mm,
Like couldn't copy and paste. There were some things that were missing, and people viewed it as a toy, and they kind of laughed at it. And then they iterated on it. I would say it was about iPhone 3 or 4 by the time they really started to get market fit with it. And then you see, people you wouldn't expect with iPhones with their iPhone. You're like, wait a second, that person has an iPhone. But that took a while, yeah. And I think with OpenAI, it's kind of we're still in the early stages of a lot of this, I feel, and I'm not really sure how it's going to shake out. But I imagine, they seem to be very iterative about how they're going about it. So I
mm,
don't know how they went about the creation of it at first, but I feel as if at least now they're taking feedback. They're not just building stuff people are asking for, but they're looking at, well, these people are asking for this, but why are they asking for it, and what are they trying to achieve, and how might we achieve that by
mm.
releasing something that solves for that. And that's kind of your job, right? It's not just to build what people ask for. It's more about getting to the need behind what they're asking for, and there might be a more elegant way to solve for what they're asking for. And but there are also some backlash. There's also some backlash with AI. So I see some things happening where a lot of my corporate clients have just banned it at the firewall. They don't want their employees even accessing it. Um, they want to keep it within the company walls, so to speak, which is going to be kind of challenging to do. Although there are some solutions they're employing to do that. I also see people taking it and interviewing fake users and saying, I can validate my idea because they asked OpenAI and it said, yeah, so I don't have to talk to customers. And it's like, okay, so they're taking some kind of persona from people and kind of building up a thing where you interact with it. And it seems very confident in it. It seems very confident in its statements. Like that's the thing that I've noticed with OpenAI and a lot of this chat GPT stuff is that it can be like really confidently wrong. But you find security in that confidence, right? And so I do see people saying, well, I don't have to talk to customers. I just typed in chat GPT and asked them, and I said, this is the kind of customer, what would that customer want? And it can literally generate personas, it can generate canvases, it can do a lot that makes you seem like they are good answers.
Hmm.
You could also just click regenerate and then it'll come up with really confident, completely different answers. So I think there's still a way where we can use it to augment what we do. I'm still a big believer in that because I think it's really hard to scale research sometimes, especially if you have a small team, you're at a startup. I think we can use AI to help scale it in some ways, but I think we just have to be careful about using it as like the single source of truth for things because in the end, it's still people and we're still behind all the tech problems, still people problems. And
Hmm.
so I think we have to be careful of how we use AI in Agile, in research and product development in general.
Completely agree. And the thing about being careful because the AI or the model is still trained at the end of the day by humans who have their blind spots and conscious or unconscious biases. So the output you're going to get is going to be as good as, whatever information or data the person or persons who trained the model would have. So what I'm still hearing from you, if I may use Steve Blank's words, would be, still get out of the building and speak to real customers. I mean, that could be a starting point, or that could be something you argument with, but the real validation is in the conversation with the people who use or consume your products.
I think the conversations are still important. I think where it gets misconstrued a bit is that well, people don't know what they want, so we shouldn't talk to them. I think that's kind of an excuse. Right? You should still talk to them. The teams that I work with talk to customers every week, quite often, and so we want that constant contact with customers, and we want to understand their world. We want to find new insights. We want to find out what they're trying to do and trying to achieve, because sometimes that can unlock completely new ideas and new ways to make money and new ways to help them. I think this idea of well, we can't talk to customers because we don't have a solution ready, or we can't talk to customers because they don't know what they want. Those aren't really the reasons you should be talking to customers. With discovery, you're trying to figure out the jobs, pains, and gains, test value prop with them, continue to understand them better. And if you pay attention to your customers, there's this great Bezos quote, right? If you pay attention to your customers and your competitors are pay attention to you, you're going to be fine because you
Hmm.
are they're getting lagging information, right? You're really deeply connected to your customers. And so I just think we've somehow built this culture over time where we can't bother customers, we can't confuse them, we can't come to them unless we have a policy solution. And I think that's becoming less and less relevant as we go to co-creation, we go more
Hmm.
to really deeply understanding them. I think we have to be careful of this culture of, well, we can't bother them unless we have a polished solution to put in front of them. I don't think that's where we're headed with like modern product management.
Hmm. And someone might be saying, listening to, well, whilst I've gone through your masterclass, I've read your book, but someone might say, whoa, 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 what do you mean by jobs, pains, and gains with respect to customers? Could you just expand on those, please?
Yeah, if you look at so my co-author Alex Osterwalder, if you go back to the book before Testing Business Ideas, there's a value proposition design book where
Yes.
we have the value prop canvas. If you look at the circle in that book, so the tool kind of has a square and a circle. And we usually start with the circle side, which is the customer profile. And with the profile, you're really trying to think of a role or even a person. You're not trying to do it at the org level. You're trying to think of an actual human being. And in that, we kind of break it down into three sections. One is customer jobs to be done. So you can think about what are the usually functional jobs, the tasks they're trying to do. You could also weave in, social jobs, emotional, supporting. It can get really complicated, but I try to keep it simple. But one way to find out those jobs is by talking to customers, right? The next are the pain points. So what are the pain points the customers are experiencing, usually related to the jobs they're trying to do. So if they're trying to do a task, here's all the stuff that's making it really hard to do that task.
Mm.
Some of it's directly related, some of it's tangential, but it's there. It's like these impediments that are really, these pains that they're experiencing. And then the third one is gains. So we're looking for what are the gains that can be created if they're able to either do this task really well, we're able to remove these pains. Like, what are some things that they would get out of it? And it's not always a one-to-one kind of relationship. Sometimes it's, I want peer recognition, or I want a promotion, or there's some things that are tangential that are related to gains. And so I love that model, because when we go and we start doing discovery with customers, we can start to understand, even in Agile, right? If we're doing discovery on our stories, we're trying to figure out what are they trying to achieve, and then is this thing we're about to build going to help them achieve that? What are the pains they're experiencing? Can we have characteristics or features that address these big pain points they're experiencing? And then let's just not solely focus on the pains. Let's also think about delighters and gains and things we could do to like kind of make them smile and make them have a good day, right? And so what are some things that we could do to help them with that? And so I love that framing, because it kind of checks a lot of the boxes of, can they do the task, but also can we remove the pains that they're experiencing trying to do it, and then can we kind of help create these aha moments, these gains for them?
Thank you, and thanks for going into that and the definitions of those terms. Now let's just look at designing experiments, and of course, for the listeners or people, if you're watching on YouTube, please get the book Testing Business Ideas. There's a wealth of information there. But at a high level, David, can you share with us what's the process you would advise for one to go through in designing? Okay, yes, we have an idea, it's going to change the world, but what's the process you would recommend at a high level for testing this out?
At a high level, it's really 3 steps.
Hmm.
The first is extracting your assumptions. So that's why I like the desirable, viable, feasible framing. If you have other themes you want to use, that's fine. But I use desirable, viable, feasible, and I extract. So what's your risk around the market, the customer, their jobs to be done, the value prop, all that. Viability is what's your risk around revenue, cost. Can you keep costs low enough? Can you make money with this in some way, make it sustain? And then feasibility is much more, can you do it? Can you execute it? Are there things that prevent you from just executing on it and delivering it? So that step one is just extracting those, because there's stuff is usually inside your head. You're worried about it. Some of them might be written down. Some of them might not be. If you're in a team, it's good to have perspectives, get people that can talk to each theme together and compromise and, come together. The second part of the process is mapping and prioritization. So we want to map and focus on the assumptions that we've extracted that are the most important, where we have the least amount of evidence. So if we're going to focus experimentation, I want to focus on things that make a big difference, and not necessarily play in a space that's like kind of fun to play in, and we can do a bunch of experiments, but it doesn't really pay down our risk. And so I like focusing on what would be called like a leap of faith assumption, which I know Eric Ries uses in Lean Startup. It also goes back to probably like Kierkegaard or something. And then riskiest assumption is another way you could frame it. Like, what are the riskiest assumptions? But basically, you're trying to say, what are the things that are most important where we have least amount of evidence? So that's step 2, is prioritization with mapping. And then step 3 is running experiments. And so we choose the top right. Because we've extracted using the themes, we have desirable, viable, feasible. We can use that to help match experiments that will help us pay down the risk. And so I always look for mismatched things. Like, you're not going to pay down your feasibility risk by running customer interviews. That doesn't help you whether or not you can deliver it. So making sure that you're matching your risk, and that's kind of where the book plays in mostly, because we have 44 experiments that are all organized by desirable, viable, feasible, and then we have like cost, setup time, runtime, evidence strength, capabilities. There's like a bunch of kind of information radiators on there to help you choose. And so we basically run experiments to then go and find out, are these things that have to be true, that we don't have a lot of evidence to prove them out? Are they true or not? And so we start using this process to kind of find out, and then we come back and update our maps and update our artifacts. But that's kind of the 3-step process: would be extract, map, and then test.
Thank you. And would you say that there is a time when the testing stops?
I would say it never completely stops, or at least hopefully it doesn't completely stop. Even if you're using discovery and delivery, I find that usually in the beginning there's a lot of discovery and maybe a little bit of delivery or almost no delivery. And then as you de-risk, you have kind of like more delivery and then a little bit less discovery. And then maybe if you're in a kind of repeatable mode where you're trying to scale something, there's a lot of delivery and a little bit of discovery. But where I get really nervous are teams that kind of have a phase or a switch and they say, okay, we've done all the discovery. Now we're just going to build and deliver.
Hmm.
I feel as if, that constant contact with customers, being able to constantly understand them, their needs are going to change over time. As you scale, it's going to change things. And so I get really nervous when teams want to just kind of act like it's a phase and we're done with our testing, right? We're done with our discovery. And I feel great organizations are always discovering to an extent. So
Hmm.
it's just really finding the balance with your teams and with your orgs. Like how much delivery do you have to do? How much discovery do you need to kind of inform that delivery? So ideally, it doesn't stop, but the percentage of discovery you're doing and testing will most likely change over time.
So in the world of Agile, Agile with a capital A in terms of, the frameworks that's originated from software development, the role of the product owner slash product manager is typically associated with ensuring that this sort of continuous exploration and discovery is carried out throughout the product's life cycle. Do you have any thoughts on this notion or idea?
I think there's always some level of risk and uncertainty in your backlog and in your roadmaps. So people in charge of product should be helping reduce that uncertainty. Now, it's usually not on their own. They'll pair with a researcher, maybe a designer. They might even be pairing with software developers to take notes during interviews and things like that to socialize how they're paying down the risk. But I think if you look at your backlog, you're kind of looking at middle to bottom and saying, oh, there's a lot of uncertainty here. I'm not really sure if we should even be working on these, right? So part of that process should be running discovery on it. And so I try to socialize it. So like if you're in your stand-ups, talk about some of the discovery work you're doing. If you're in planning, plan out some of the discovery work you're doing. It's just going to help you build this overall cohesive idea of, well, I'm seeing something come in that I have to work on, but it's not the first time I've seen it. And I kind of understand the why. I understand that we did discovery on it to better understand and inform this thing and shape what I'm about to work on. And so I think it helps create those like touch points with your team.
Thank you for that, David. So let's go on. I mean, there is, of course, your really, really helpful book. Personally, I have used it and I've taken. I've not done all the experiments there, but definitely some of the experiments. I have coached teams or leaders and organizations on how to use that. But apart from testing business ideas, are there other books that you have found yourself recommending to people?
Yeah, I think there's some that go deeper, right, on a specific subject. So, for example, interviews. That could be its whole book itself, right? And so there's some great books out there. Steve Portico has some great books on understanding like how to conduct interviews. I also like the mom test. While I don't like the title of the book, the content is pretty good, which is basically how to really do a customer interview well. And
Mm.
not ask like closed-ended leading bias questions and just get the answers you want so you can jump to build. So there's some books I keep coming back to as well. And then there's still some older books that we built on foundationally as part of testing business ideas, right? So if you look at business model generation from Alex Osterwalder, value
Yeah.
prop design, the testing business ideas book fits really well in that framework. And while I reference business model canvas and value prop canvas in testing business ideas, I don't deep dive on it because there's literally two books that dive into that. A lot of the work we've built upon is Steve Blank's work from Four
Mm.
Steps to the Epiphany, and I think people think that book's dated for some reason now, but it's very applicable, especially B2B discovery. And so I constantly, with my B2B startups and B2B corporations, I'm constantly referring them back to that book as a model for looking at how you go about this process from customer discovery to customer validation. So yeah, there are some ones I keep coming back to. Some of the newer ones, there are some books on scaling because I'm usually working up until product market fit, and I don't have a lot of growth experiments in there. So there are some books now starting to come out about scaling, but I think if you're looking at testing business ideas and saying, oh, there's something here and it kind of covers it, but I want to go a lot deeper, then
Hmm.
it's finding complementary books that help you go deeper on a specific thing. Because testing business ideas is more like a library and a reference guide and a process of how to go through it. It would have been like 2 or 3 times in length if we had gone really, really deep on everything. So I think 200 pages of experiments was a pretty good, pretty good like quantity there. And so I'm often I'm referring books that go deeper on a specific thing where people want to learn more.
Thank you for that. So if the audience, they've listened to what you have to say and they're like, yeah, I think I need to speak with David. How can they reach you?
Yeah, I mean, davidjbland.com is a great place to go. That's me. You can read about me. You can watch videos on me presenting. I have, videos of me presenting at conferences, but also there's a YouTube channel you can go to where I have some of my webinars that are free to watch as well, and just little coaching videos I make where I'm like, hey, I have a team that's really struggling with this concept, and I just kind of make a quick YouTube video helping people out to say this is how I'm addressing this with a team.
Hmm.
Also Precoil, Precoil. That's my company, and so there's a lot of great content there as well. And then just in general social media, although I have to say I'm pulling back on social media a little bit. So I would say for the most part, LinkedIn is a great place to find me. I'm usually posting memes about customer discovery and videos and things just trying to help people like make you laugh and educate you. And so LinkedIn, surprisingly, I don't think I'd ever say like, oh, come check me out on LinkedIn, 5 or 10 years ago. But now that's where I spend a lot of my time. And I feel like that's where my customers are and it's where I can help them. So yeah, I end up spending a lot of time on LinkedIn too.
Yeah, some of your memes there are like, I mean, how do I put it? Just gets me up in stitches. So yeah, I don't know how you find them, or do you commission actors to do some of them? But yeah, it's good. So yeah, so LinkedIn, social media is the main place, and your websites. Those would be in the show notes. I also heard you do have a course, an online course. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, this summer, I finally found some space to put together my thoughts into assumptions mapping course. So that is on Teachable. I'm going to be building it out with more courses, but I've just had enough people look at that 2 by 2 and read the book and say, I think I know how to facilitate this, but I'm not sure. And so I literally just went like step by step with a case study, and it has some exercise as well where you could see how to set up the agenda, how to do the pre-work for it, who you need in the room for it, how to
Hmm.
facilitate it, what traps to look out for, because sometimes you're trying to facilitate this priority sort of exercise and then things go awry. So I talk about some of the things I've learned over the years facilitating it, and then what to do a bit after. So yeah, it's a pretty just like bite size, hands on. Oh, I want to learn this and I want to go try it with the team or do it myself. So yeah, I do have a new course that I launched that just walks people step by step like I would be coaching them.
Okay. And do you mind mentioning out loud the website? Is it precoil.teachable.com? And they can find your assumptions mapping fundamentals course there,
Correct.
right?
Yes, it's on
Okay.
precoil.teachable.com.
Okay. And search for Assumptions Mapping Fundamentals by David Bland. Right. So, are there any final words of wisdom that you have for the audience, David?
Oh, try to keep an open mind when you're going through a lot of this work. I feel as if the mindset is so important. So if you're taking this check the box mentality, you're not going to get the results out of following any of these processes, right? So I think being able this idea of, oh, I'm opening myself to the idea that there's some assumptions here that may not be true that I should probably test. It shouldn't be an exercise where you're just checking the box saying, yep, I wrote down my assumption, and then yeah, I ran an experiment that validated that, and then move on. It's more about the process of trying to, because your uncertainty and risk kind of move around.
Hmm.
So just the idea of mindset, I can't stress enough that keep an open mind and be willing to learn things that maybe you weren't expected to learn. And I think all these great businesses we look at over the years, they started off as something else or some form of something else, and then they happened upon something that was an aha moment during the process. And I think we have to be careful of rewriting history and saying it was somebody was a genius and he had a single brilliant idea and then just built the thing and made millions. Very rarely does that ever occur. And so I think when you start really unwinding it, it's about having an open mind, being willing to learn things that maybe you didn't anticipate. And I think just that mindset is so important.
Hmm. Thanks. I don't mean to detract from what you've said, but what I'm hearing from you as well is that it's not a linear process. So whilst you might have in the book and the ideas you've shared, kind of in simplifying it, there are steps, but sometimes there might be loops to it. So having an open mind to know that something that worked today or something you got a positive result from might not necessarily work tomorrow. There's always more, and it's an iterative journey.
Yeah, it's quite iterative.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, David, for this making the time for this conversation. I really learned a lot and I enjoyed the conversation. Many thanks.
Thanks for having me.
That's all we have for now. Thanks for listening. If you like this show, do subscribe at www.agileinnovationleaders.com. That's agileinnovationleaders.com, or your favorite podcast provider. Also share with friends and do leave a review on iTunes. This would help others find this show. I'd also love to hear from you, so please drop me an email at ola@agileinnovationleaders.com. Take care and God bless.